Fáilte. We're here now with the Sunday papers for the afternoon. If you're listening to us earlier, you may have heard us speaking about the magic of the FA Cup and the various different locations around England that we're hearing about, sometimes for the first time, and also places that we might be a bit more familiar with. But I did get one text in from James, who told me that Harrogate is to Leeds what Oranmore is to Galway. Make of that what you will. That means probably Harrogate is where the Leeds people go for their fresh walks, and possibly where property prices are going up because the city slickers are moving out to get their nice sea views. But like I said, we're with the paper review here first. But before we go and chat the papers, I'll just give you a quick overview of what's in all the papers, beginning with the Sunday Times. David Walsh has a piece on the back page there, and on the front page, speaking of the magic of the FA Cup, Toon Raiders. And that is, of course, lowly Cambridge pile on the misery for Newcastle. At least they can concentrate on the league now, is a little sub-headline. That's, of course, referring to their 1-0 win over Newcastle yesterday. And on the side there, Pogba to miss another 6 weeks with injury. And there's lots of people out there probably might say, well, that probably won't do much harm. Now, the Sunday Mirror back page, we have a picture here of Virgil van Dijk looking very serious, and the headline is Lucky, Lucky City, and that's Van Dijk reckons Liverpool and Chelsea have it tougher than Pep stars, and he has told runaway leaders, Premier League leaders Manchester City, that they have gotten lucky this season. I feel that's a bit like what we'd call in GAA world rousing the opposition and putting something to put up on the dressing room wall. Now, the Sun on Sunday, their back page also refers to Man United, and that says Moan United, turmoil at Old Trafford. Moan United, a good headline there. Maguire, this cannot go on. Ron's agent flies in for crisis talks, and Macari wants axe for rebels. So it appears all the crack is happening in Old Trafford, if we're to believe the Sunday papers this weekend. The Sunday People, the Irish Sunday People, also have Cambridge on their back page as well. They came, they saw, they conquered. Great headline, and it's beautiful photos here of jubilant scenes of celebrations of Joe Ironside, and it was the Cambridge hero for his 56th minute goal. Newcastle 0, Cambridge 1, and also Virgil van Dijk is also referred to here. City ? Lucky. It's a bit like, remember Jay and the In-Betweeners. There's a little feeling of that about these headlines. And also Man United alluded to as well. Maguire, don't blame the boss, it's our fault. And it feels like maybe, perhaps, the players are beginning to take some responsibility there. The Irish Mail on Sunday, we have a big headline on the back there, I'm sick of our failure, and above that is a photo of all the action last night in Thomond Park. Munster's win over Ulster. 14-man Reds find their fire to stun Ulster. And like I said, I'm sick of our failure. Maguire admits United's players letting down fans. And a small box on the right hand side, Cluxton era is officially at an end. That's a piece by Shane McGrath. And the write-up of that is Dessie Farrell brought news that effectively brings one of the greatest careers in GAA history to a close yesterday when he confirmed that Stephen Cluxton will not be a part of the Dublin senior football team this season. The circumstances of his departure remain thickened in mystery, but after his non-appearance in last season's unfulfilled All-Ireland defence, Farrell's comments after yesterday's Auburn Cup win over Offaly were no surprise. And I don't think that really was a surprise for anyone. I think the surprise announcement would be the opposite there, that Cluxton was back. And the Sunday World. We also, speaking of Cluxton, he's there taking up the back page there in the Sunday World. Best of Clux. No fanfare as hero Cluxton bows out, says Dubs Farrell. And that's a piece by Sean McGoldrick. And there's a photo there of Stephen Cluxton when he was in action. Goodbye to the hill. Dublin boss Dessie Farrell confirms Stephen Cluxton has retired from inter-county football. And that really is the end of an era to anyone who's been watching football over the last nearly generation or so. And finally, on my hands here, I have the Sunday Independent Sports Supplement, and we have another photo from the rugby there, and it's Munster hit back, and that's again Munster's victory over Ulster in Thomond Park in terrible conditions last night. A new era beckons as Cluxton stays away. Farrell confirms ex-captain won't be involved for 2022. And there's also a really interesting piece at the back as well, written by Eamon Sweeney. Anyone who was interested in the darts last weekend, you'll all know who this gentleman is, right? And of course, we'll be talking about that, I think, and lots of other stories in the papers over the coming hour or so. Like I said, I'm joined by Clíona Foley and by Dr. Katie Liston. I was asking the ladies earlier in the programme how their Christmas was. It probably feels like a long time ago, Nailies. How was your Christmases? Are you over it now?
the tree is still up. Is that a bad or a good sign?
That's
Marcy?
a good sign. I think all the light in January, all the better. I only took mine down yesterday, Clíona, and that was under duress. I was told I wasn't allowed to keep it up, so I spent the day cleaning, taking it. But I'd happily leave it up till like the evenings get a bit longer, but apparently that's frowned upon.
No. I have neighbours who, two houses, who left their lights on their outside tree all of the last 2 years to give us all a bit of cheer. And I think, is it a Spanish tradition, I think, as well, that they do, that they leave the lights up for a particularly long time. But I love to see them, and I think leave them up as long as you can. Don't worry about it.
How was your Christmas, Katie?
It was good, thank you. And Happy New Year and Happy Nullag Naman. It was probably a quieter one. And I dare say that's been the theme for most people. My sister and my sister-in-law both unfortunately contracted the lurgy. So at the very last minute, what was, a planned wonderful family Christmas dinner, obviously within the regulations of households, everybody just disbanded to their own houses and had a quiet Christmas. But it's the case for many people. And I suppose we can hope now, and fingers crossed, we're a bit more optimistic that we're getting towards the worst end of this pandemic, all being well.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, famous last words, but all the signs appear to be cautiously pointing toward, hopefully we're at, I don't want to use the word end, because the last time we said this we had another attack left of field, but hopefully, all fingers, toes, everything possibly crossed, that it looks like. And thankfully with this wave, while some people are getting sick, it doesn't appear to be anywhere near as bad as it was. Thank the Lord for vaccines and all that. We'll be discussing later with a certain gentleman who plays tennis very, very well. But I think we were discussing earlier, ladies, what stories we wanted to talk about. And I think a story that stood out to all of us who opened up the papers this morning is in the Sunday Times. And Clíona, I might let you describe this. It's just so lovely. And I just think if anyone's at home, if you haven't bought a paper yet today, go out and get yourself the Sunday Times and show it to yourself if you're somebody who needs a little kick for a little bit of motivation, or show it to maybe one of your children if you feel they're lacking confidence or lacking a bit of belief, because you'll lap the story up and you realise, with a little bit of luck, let's not forget that we do need a bit of luck and a bit of help from people who are in positions stronger than ours. Who knows where you might get to. Clíona, do you want to take it away there?
Yeah, thanks very much. We all need uplifting stories at the moment, and particularly uplifting stories in sport, given that the papers are always so, and particularly at the moment, just seem to be full of bad news with COVID cancellations and the Djokovic story and Man United and whatever else you have. But Peter O'Reilly has a beautiful story, a really uplifting feature in the Sunday Times today, and it is about a young man called Muzammil Sherzad, and he is originally from Afghanistan, but at this minute in time he's in Guyana with the Irish under-19 cricket team, who begin their World Cup campaign next weekend. But he has the most extraordinary story. It's not extraordinary to anybody who knows anybody in direct provision, I'm sure, in Ireland. But it is just a remarkable story. Particularly when we take it back to the last paragraph. And I'm not going to give the whole story here, but it's safe to say that this young man has come from through Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, Bulgaria, Serbia, where he spent 4 months in a refugee camp. Milan, Paris, Cherbourg, Dublin. That's how this young man got to Ireland. He has relations living in Tipperary, and he comes from Jalalabad in the northeast of Afghanistan. And anybody who's been following the news over recent years knows the name of that city. And he puts it brilliantly, Peter, when he says, teenage boys must live with the prospect of conscription to one warring faction or another. When Muzzy, as they call him, escaped, he did so with the goal of finding his maternal uncle in Ireland and opening a path for his widowed mother and 3 siblings to follow him here. And he talks to him about his perilous 8,000-kilometre journey to Ireland. It is an extraordinary story and deeply, deeply touching. And we hear so much about direct provision, and we hear so much about refugees and people seeking asylum in Ireland. And just when you hear the true story of somebody and how real it is, and also about how sport has become such an important part in his life, it's amazing. And Muzzy saw a post on Cricket Ireland's Facebook page. It's just funny, isn't it? It has social media now, works in sport and the power of it. And it said there was a competition, find a fast bowler. So he turned up He went from Mullinahone to Balrotherry. He turned up basically at a trial, and Peter O'Reilly, as the journalist says himself, he saw him bowl the following summer in Sydney Parade when he took the new ball for North Kildare against Pembroke, because he's been playing for North Kildare, and he just said he's relatively slight but bowls with a classical side-on action. He has something about him. It's an amazing story, really, really touching story, but also just so true, and also so important what you said, Máire Treasa, about the importance of other people helping other people as well. Like he wouldn't have got here. He needs lifts from Mullinahone. He couldn't settle in Mullinahone. When he did get to Mullinahone to live with relatives, he found it very difficult to settle there. He didn't speak English. He had all the usual, the remarkable and difficult complications that any refugee has coming to a new country. But people have helped him all along the way, and I think that's the power of sport.
Yeah, it was just such a lovely piece to read. But I think, Katie, for me, what stood out for this, and maybe when I was younger I didn't have the cop on, I might have read this and said, geez, his talent, and wasn't he lucky, and that's where it got him. There's plenty of talented people who've been left out because the system or the world we live in doesn't support them. And what stands out now with me with a little bit more maturity and maybe a bit more cop on is that yes, he had the talent, yes, he had the skills, yes, he was motivated, but he needed people to help him get to where he needed to be. And I suppose that's still happening in all different kind of sports, not just in Ireland but all around the world.
Yeah, I mean, today's papers as a total, Máire, probably a really nice illustration of sport being a microcosm of wider social issues, especially elite sport. I mean, and let's face it, we are talking about that, the talent-driven ended of cricket, looking for some new talent coming through. We'll get to Djokovic and probably others in a few minutes. But what happens in sport when you move from grassroots to elite level is you have this expansion of connections with people, social connections. And much of that we know happens very organically in Ireland because we have a sport that is so indigenous to us. And in a sense, it's much more than sport because it's part of who we are. It's this community sport. And obviously at the elite level, it becomes much more than that now. And the demands made on the Gaelic players are probably akin to professional players. But you can see in this piece the way Peter has captured this young man's attempts to try to reach out and the ways in which people have met him in reaching out. Probably in all of it here, it's not just, what stands out to me, it's not just his consistent attempts to consistently try and do better and get to this goal that he had for himself. But quietly in the background, Peter mentions, I think it's maybe halfway through the article, about the disjuncture that Clíona describes he found himself. He wasn't really settling in Tipperary, and indeed relatives said to him, there's no cricket here in Ireland. And let's face it, there wouldn't be many that would know probably of cricket in the rural areas of Ireland. But it's his social worker. And Peter says just very quickly in a sentence, his social worker found him a foster family in Carlow. It wasn't prime cricketing territory, but the implication is it was near to Dublin, because this young man recognised through the social media outlets that he wanted to try and, respond to one of the calls for finding a fast bowler. And he says himself, I registered myself. Now, that is in many ways the strength, if you want to call it that, the power, Clíona used that term, of sport in terms of making relationships, enabling people to make connections. Now, it has a flip side as well, because it can be as exclusionary as it can be inclusionary. I think that's where you're coming from, Máire T, when you talk about the fact that it's far more than just the individual look. It's then what are the resources that people and groups have to be able to avail of those connections. And when it comes to discussing power, we'll see it in all of the articles today. There are some groups that have more access than others. And inevitably, we're always trying to look to those that are excluded a little bit more to see, can we achieve equity, especially in elite sport, because it's so uneven.
Yeah, for sure. And we see that in even sports media, and it's changing thankfully bit by bit. But any area, if you're in any way different, sometimes you need somebody who's in the fold to open the door and bring you into the circle. And once you're in the circle, it's fine, but it can be quite difficult sometimes to make your way in when you don't have those connections. And in one sense, maybe he was lucky that maybe he landed in Ireland, where he found some people who might actually listen to him. But not only did they listen, they were able to point him in the direction of, this might help you and you might go that way, and I might know a man down the road. But you mightn't get that perhaps in a bigger country where we have fewer of those connections, and they can work for you, Clíona, and they can work against you, because if you don't have those mates, it can be difficult. But it seems that this guy found his path regardless.
Yeah, and just imagine the resilience of him. Like he describes he got into the back of a truck in Sherbrooke, and when the truck came off the road somewhere, I presume somewhere after Rosslare or Dublin, he knocked on the wall. The driver came out and he ran. He just got out of the back truck and he ran, and then obviously, you know, made connections, used social media, did what he could. There's a great line at the end of it. The guy coaching him now, a guy called Albert van der Meer, who's Cricket Ireland's talent pathway manager, is also the under-19 manager, part of that team. He said when they were flying over to Guyana, he said some of his teammates were teasing. They were teasing Muzzy and saying, "Oh, you know, it was his first trip on a plane. Was he going to be nervous?" And Van der Meer says, "I'm thinking this kid is hidden on trucks, crawled through jungles as a 14-year-old to make it over borders, been a stowaway, slept in public parks. Somehow I don't think an airplane journey is going to faze him." But it's that. I mean, it's really interesting, and we'll talk about Djokovic later on. But it is really interesting, you know, to see where people's strength of character come through and where they've come from. Because remember, you know, we'll talk about his Djokovic's background in Serbia, you know, where he
wasn't a fairy tale either, no,
stuck in a war-torn country and had horrendous experiences as well. I think it's very interesting to see it, but it's about, I suppose, just to have the tenacity to keep battling for that is just remarkable, you know. And also, I think that when we hear the story of asylum seekers, refugees, and we can understand it in our own context, it helps us to understand the plight that they have. And just to, like, he met a guy called Hussein Maroof, who's from North Kildare Cricket Club, and he was the guy who said to him, if he could get a bus to the Red Cow Inn, there would be a lift to Balradry. And I just think, like, even hearing it in that context and knowing, you know, he has to get from Tipperary to Dublin, then he has to get somebody to pick him up in Dublin. He's after getting his driver's license now, and he's saving up all the money he can, working as a pizza delivery to buy a car. But it is a fantastic story, and I think it really does bring through just the pure humanity of sport, really.
It's funny as well, like, Katie, when I was reading it and I was thinking, like, geez, that's a bit of a journey to try and get from Tipperary to the Red Cow and get a lift. And I was thinking, hold on a minute, catch yourself on. This guy's made the journey from Afghanistan to Ireland. This is not a bother to him.
And it's in that regard, it's actually not unusual. I mean, that kind of section of Peter O'Reilly's piece took me right back to my own trajectory through sport, in an era when, you know, I would cycle maybe 10 or 15 miles, then get a lift for another 20 miles to get to county training, and then do the same return journey backwards. Now, those were in days, I think, when parents were happier to let a young person, a young woman especially, cycle on the side of a road for 10 or 15 miles before getting a lift and moving onwards and backwards. But it does bring out the consistent story of sport and social capital, and the extent to which relations built positively in sport can enable young people to try to reach their aspirations. And his story is quite extraordinary. Kudos to Peter, I have to say, to bring the humanity out in that piece. And I think we all wish him well, the young man on his cricket journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, if you haven't gone out to buy a paper yet today, and you haven't bothered, it is well worth your time to go out and pick it up and just read it for that article alone, and just maybe count our blessings a little bit, how comfy we are that we have a nice comfy armchair, hopefully, to read the paper. And then when you turn the page, then it's Novak Djokovic, Katie, who's looking out at us, looking very intense with his holding on to his racket. And I think obviously he's a polarising individual, but when we tear back all the layers, not much different to our previous story. He's a product of not the best childhood either, you know, through no fault of his own, living in a war-torn country.
No, and probably not surprisingly, Máire. I mean, he's getting a lot of coverage across all the papers. I
everywhere.
have two at the moment. The size of my desk is limiting, so I have two main ones in front of me. I'm looking at, I think, the Independent, page 14, and then in the Times, it's kind of 14-15 split across a double.
Yeah,
and
he's everywhere.
Yeah, David Walsh's piece on the back of the Sunday Times. So the picture you're referring to, I think, is the Sunday Times one initially.
Yeah, and then he's on the back page of the David Walsh's piece, smiling with his wife. And
then Tommy Conlon is the writer in the Independent. And I think you might argue, probably if you were reading this afresh, there's a slightly different take to Djokovic, and certainly in the tone of how the writers are approaching him. So you can see, I suppose, there's a continuum of those, and probably not just in the sports sections, to be fair, because this has become a worldwide issue now, of those that are lauding him for his attempts to pursue his dreams and I suppose, siding with what appears to be some confusion around the clarity of guidelines between the state and the federal guidelines in Australia, through to those that are saying, well, you know, there are consequences to your actions and now you have to live with these consequences. But it's a lovely illustration, I think, of the layers to what's happening in elite sport, because on the individual level, you have this high profile player, one of the leading tennis players, seeking, if I understand his career correctly, to probably usurp both Federer and Nadal for Grand Slam titles. And he's made that clear, I think, since he lost the last Grand Slam last year, that he wants to get to this level, and a lot of support behind him for that, because the Australian Open is the first Grand Slam, or the big event of the new year, as you know. So he's record breaking. At a societal level, then you can begin to see the pressures and the lobbying that starts to come through around these high profile sports people, because you have the mismatch, as I say, or at least what appears to be a lack of clarity between state regulations in Victoria, in Australia, and the border force regulations in terms of who's permitted into Australia. And in that, you have a microcosm of Tennis Australia trying then to use their diplomatic presence to communicate better with the Australian government on this, and indeed the wider picture. And you can pick it up across the two pieces that I've read today of representations made by Serbians at the Australian embassy in Serbia, and no doubt vice versa with the fans outside where Djokovic is being held at the moment. So it brings out so many layers, and certainly the adverse start to his career brings more humanity to him as well, not unlike the young cricketer we've just discussed, because he, as you rightly say, grew up in war-torn Serbia. David Walsh talks about this a little bit more, I think, because he engages with Djokovic's own book called Serve to Win, where they had a basement shelter. They spent 78 consecutive nights when the city was being bombed. And Djokovic says in his own book and in his own words, something changed in me, in my family, in my people. We decided to stop being afraid. After so much death, so much destruction, we simply stopped hiding. And Walsh goes on to say the background and the mentality came from the experience, and they're part of the reason Djokovic has been, for Walsh at least, one of his favourite of the three greatest players of all time. But then when you read Tommy Conlon, you get a little bit more...
it changes the perspective.
The tone changes a bit. And this is reflected, I think, in all the coverage at the moment, because Tommy Conlon says that Djokovic has attracted a lot of attention because of what was claimed to be initially an anti-vaccine stance. Now, David Walsh appears to kind of caveat that by quoting Djokovic directly, who says, I was never anti-vaccine. What I was against was the imposition of vaccines. Because he says, you know, who am I to question those who have, in the field of medicine, have been saving lives around the world when it comes to vaccination. So I think he was asserting, I guess, his rights to whether or not he would take the vaccine. But Tommy Conlon says by the time Djokovic landed in Melbourne, where the Grand Slam is being held, Djokovic was already carrying a lot more baggage than his tennis gear. So there's a nice use of language to bring out humorous approach to it. He was one of the world's most famous anti-vaccine proponents. And at the time we're discussing this, and probably, I mean, we were 24 hours prior to these papers. At the time of the writing of the articles, we didn't have as much information as beginning to come out now about the case. And Tennis Australia are being a little bit more forthcoming since, but the caveat that I think that the adjourned case will be heard tomorrow in the Australian courts as to whether or not the banning of, or the lifting of his visa, in a sense, will be stopped. And I was interested in what Tennis Australia have said in the last 24 hours. And this is it's quoted at least on page 15 of the Sunday Times. So just opposite that intense picture of Djokovic that you described, Máire. And they say that it seems that they were aware of the differences between the guidelines that they have set in place, which is that if you've contracted COVID, you have a medical exemption, which is the sporting exemption, but the mismatch potentially between that and the border force, essentially the Australian border force. And so there has been communication prior to this, but Tennis Australia do make clear that it's not only Djokovic here, that it's a couple of other players also that have been detained as a result of this mismatch. And Tennis Australia seem to be claiming that they've done everything that they can that they are, they say, a person-centred or a player-centred organisation, and that the treatment of the players, I think there's about 4 in total, and we may well hear of more, who fall within these categories, goes to the heart of the viability of the Australian Open. So there's clearly been, I suppose, diplomatic representations in the background, not only because of Djokovic, but because of the other players. But I imagine most of the focus from Tennis Australia is on Djokovic because he's a big draw. He's going for this record-breaking attempt. The Australian Open is the biggest Grand Slam of the year, and I can certainly vouch to the event that it was. I was lucky enough to attend it maybe more than probably about 18 years ago now. And it is an absolutely fantastic sporting spectacle, albeit it will be a little bit reduced because of the COVID regulations at the moment. And I think there's probably a bit more to come here in the legal case that's going to draw out this mismatch, and whether or not Djokovic has either been caught in now a political controversy, or indeed whether he may well have sought to use this lack of clarity in the guidelines to try to actually get into the Open itself, potentially knowing that there might well be some issues when he arrived in Australia. Well, we'll wait and see. There's plenty more we can say about this, which we will. We do just need to take a break for a few moments, but we will return to the subject and many more. Text us 53106 or tweet us at Off The Ball with your thoughts if you wish. Do stay with us. The paper review continues after this break.
The Sunday Papers on Off The Ball. Listen in the car with Apple CarPlay or Android Auto on the News Talk app. Powered by Go Loud.
At Harvey Norman, we've got big deals on home appliances and technology. Save €80 on the Huawei MateBook D laptop with Intel Core i3 processor and sleek portable design. Now only $569. Or save €56 on the Garmin Instinct Solar, the rugged GPS-served smartwatch with solar charging, giving incredible battery life and water resistant up to 100 metres. Now only $354. Shop our big deals safely in our spacious stores or online at harveynorman.ie.
Go! Sparkling winter sale at Mount Wolseley Hotel, Spa and Golf Resort. Breathe in the crisp country air. Savour the woodland walking trail. Take in a round of golf on the Championship Golf Course. All boxes ticked, complete with a forest playground and zip wire, extensive leisure facilities and an award-winning spa with exclusive indoor beach. Plan your New Year country escape with up to 20% package discounts on mountwolseley.ie.
InsureMyCars.ie. Don't cut corners on your car insurance. Get a better quote at InsureMyCars.ie. Ireland's trusted car insurance specialists. We search the market to get you the best cover at the lowest prices. InsureMyCars.ie. City Financial Marketing Group Limited, trading as InsureMyCars.ie, is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
In 2021, Volkswagen's ID3 and ID4 were Ireland's best-selling all-electric cars. But leadership means more than being number one. It means you have trust and confidence in us to make a difference. Trust in us to create all-electric cars with zero driving emissions. And confidence that our all-electric cars help deliver a better future. That's Volkswagen all-electric leadership. This is just the start. Volkswagen. Best-selling all-electric cars last year. Claim applies to January to November 2021.
Eurocycles Euro Baby, come on down lads, the crack is mighty. The Eurocycles Euro Baby prices can't be bet. For bicycles and things with wheels and lots for babies, yeah.
Eurocycles Euro Baby, massive stock clearance sale at EurocyclesEurobaby.com and Eurocycles Euro Baby Longmire Road and Swords. Sale now on.
The Eurocycles Euro Baby prices can't be bet. For bicycles and things with wheels and lots for babies, yeah. See our product range and buy online at EurocyclesEurobaby.com.
The new year means new opportunities, and that's why Grow with Aldi is back for 2022. Aldi Ireland is looking for adventure seekers, innovators and creative suppliers to get involved in the campaign. News Talk will be showcasing some of the best small and medium food and drink suppliers from last year and catching up with some exciting new entrants in 2022. Not only will you benefit from the Grow with Aldi supplier development programme, but you'll also have the chance to get your product on the shelves of 149 Aldi stores nationwide. Add some adventure into your venture and head to newstalk.com/Grow with Aldi. Entries close by the 21st of January. Grow with Aldi, proudly supported by News Talk.
On 106 to 108 FM. On the News Talk app, powered by Go Loud and smart speaker. This is News Talk.
It's 2:00. Good afternoon. I'm Quisha Conley. Gardaí have opened a murder investigation after a man was shot dead this morning in West Dublin. The man, aged in his late 40s, was shot at a house on Thomond Road in Ballyfermot. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The scene remains sealed off and the street is closed to through traffic as a forensic investigation continues. Gardaí in Ballyfermot are appealing for anyone with information to come forward. The Department of Health has reported 21,384 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 today. 984 people are in hospital with the virus, of whom 83 are being treated in ICU. As demand for PCR tests continue, the HSE this week estimated that up to 150,000 COVID-19 infections may have escaped official confirmation. From last week, symptomatic people aged between 4 and 39 without an underlying health illness were advised to contact the HSE and request for antigen tests to be sent out to them. CEO of the HSE, Paul Reid, says a new online system to allow people to register a positive antigen test result should be available from next week.
If you look at our end-to-end system, it's being built around PCR test. What we have done now, we're just finalising the design and testing of it during this week, is build an equivalent pathway for antigen testing now to be able to register that test for people who've had them registered. Issues around it, and the system will be ready during the course of next week. We'll be putting it live so people can register their tests.
And a Buddhist group have rejected neighbours' concerns that a new silent meditation temple will be too noisy. KU Buddhism Ireland says are looking to build a 3-storey learning and meditation centre in Kilmainham, according to the Sunday Times. A historical society and some local residents have submitted objections to the plans due to the building's size, parking and noise. The group says the building will be soundproofed to prevent noise disturbing meditation, and therefore the occasional use of ritual horns will not bother locals. It's 2:02.
News Talk weather.
Thanks to Ryanair. Plan your summer holiday today with Ryanair seat sale to the beaches of Spain, Portugal, Italy or Greece.
Cloudy with light rain showers spreading northeastwards, highest temperatures of 6 to 9 degrees. And now you're up to date on News Talk.
The Sunday papers on Off the Ball.
Fáilte leis go dtí off the ball, Nollaig na Mán, live in Seo Live go dtí 7:00 tónúna nacht lumsa Máire Treasa Ní Cheallaigh. And joining me on the paper review, we're going to rejoin actually the discussion about Novak Djokovic, because there's so many layers to it, and I'm joined by Dr. Katie Liston and Clíona Foley on our paper review. And Clíona, I might come to you here because Katie has given us, just before the break there, gave us a really good rundown of the multiple layers. You could tell she's a lecturer because she was able to break it down in a few minutes, whereas I think I'd be blathering on for hours, and if I had anyone in front of me, they still wouldn't know any different what was going on. They'd still be as confused as they ever were. So Katie did a really good job there. Where do you fall down on this, Clíona, I suppose, or where did you lean toward in the papers this morning?
Well, I read a good piece of Barney Ronay yesterday in The Guardian, and the Examiner had it as well, which was rather like some of the pieces like David Walsh today, and some of them which are sort of, equivocating and saying, well, you have to understand where he comes from. Roy Curtis has a piece in Sunday World as well on, world champions, have this sort of, me attitude, and everything is, I do everything I can to be a champion, and, that's how you have to think about people like him. But the Mail on Sunday's coverage is interesting, and there's a few interesting news facts in it, I think, that are worth checking. We'll find out more when the legal case occurs. I think it's tomorrow in Australia. But Mike Dixon has a piece. They have a special report. So they have photos and everything showing that, like, Djokovic, we're not sure, but he's declared that his first PCR test, or his legal team was recorded on December the 16th. But the Mail on Sunday have photos of him on December the 17th giving out trophies at his own tennis centre in Belgrade. Then they have him on the 14th of December embracing players from Red Star in Belgrade. There was a EuroLeague basketball match on, and players tested positive after that. And also, I think on December the 16th, he attends an event to unveil a stamp produced in his honour by the Serbian National Post Office. So there's lots of photo evidence of all of these things happening. But the thing that actually interests me probably most in the Mail on Sunday, there's a couple of things. One, they're smart enough to get a Serbian sports writer to write a piece. It's just a short piece, but it's an interesting piece. And Sazo Osmo, that reporter, does say the biggest mistake Djokovic has made was he calls it a misstep. Total and absolute stupid thing to do was announcing on his Twitter again before flying that he had an exemption. That's what kicked all of this off, of course, and alerted the authorities. But he is being caught clearly. Scott Morrison, the Australian Prime Minister, has obviously done a massive U-turn here. They raised questions about the part being played, if you like, by the head of Australian tennis, a guy called, it'll come to me now in a minute, Craig Tilley. And they point out that, remember, Australia has been at the centre of a few controversies in recent years. This isn't the first one. They had Sharapova there in 2018, paraded her before the draw, even not long after she'd returned after serving a drugs ban. And then there was the controversy of them continuing play when the bushfires were there. So it's not the first time, and they're sort of questioning the I suppose the status of Tilley now, and where his part to be played in this. But in Mike Dix's piece, I think there's a really interesting thing in it, because he says Djokovic's team say that Tennis Australia actually filled out his complex Australian travel declaration form for him. That's a really interesting piece if that comes out in their legal case. Because, there's been so many people passing this ball and washing their hands of it, that it is interesting to see what is actually factually going to happen. But I was interested in those pieces because they bring something new to it, as opposed to opinion pieces. They do have a piece then, shocked and confused Novak's night of hell, describing how he had an 8-hour airport ordeal. They've never clearly queued for certain cheap flights that any of the rest of us, nor indeed spent any time
queuing for a PCR
at my
test.
Local A&E. Queuing for PCR test, are going to an Irish A&E at the moment, which are radically understaffed. I just
actually
think,
to be devil's advocate here for a minute, just for one point, because I know those pictures have been thrown around of Djokovic being at various events after apparently testing positive for COVID, but let's just assume, because we don't know this, he may have been completely asymptomatic, had gone off for his PCR to travel, and then if it's anything like here, may have taken at least 24 or 48 hours for the result to come back to him. So we'll give him that, Clíona. But
hold on. But no, I'm going to throw this one out as well, because Mike Dix's point says it, and it's something people may not know. The Serbian regulations dictate that people need to self-isolate for 14 days following a positive diagnosis.
Oh yes, but what I'm saying is perhaps when he was out and about, he hadn't got his result back yet. That's what I'm saying. And if he was asymptomatic, he wouldn't have been isolating. Just to, I'm being kind here, Clíona. I'm giving the man a go.
Well, that's the question they're asking. The question they're asking is when was the date of the test, and when did he get the result? They're the interesting questions to be asked as well.
Lots of questions, Katie, really there, aren't there, that we probably won't get answers to until this hearing actually starts.
And it's connected as well to probably wider discussions about the role of sport as a lightning rod in this pandemic. Because, if we go back a year or so, I think it's about a year, but honestly, my sense of time is conflated because of this pandemic. I remember thinking about the shameless hubris of, I think it might have been at last year's Australian Open, of players claiming that they, were being hard done by because they were confined to their rooms for X number of days before playing. And thinking at the time, goodness me, we need to think about the wider picture here, because there are families and businesses that are under extreme pressure, and in some respects, you might argue, a real privilege to be able to continue to pursue what is your job and also your aspiration to compete at the highest level in amongst all of this. And it's a lightning rod for what's going on in the pandemic. Probably the best example of that for anybody who's going to read the papers today, Máire T, is on page 15 of the Sunday Times. So opposite the piece by Stuart Fraser on Djokovic is a short summary by Tomás Hill López Menchero, and the heading is Meet Sports Vax Skeptics. So you have another journalist connecting this to statements made by other players, either positively or less positively towards the pandemic. So there's a couple of examples from NFL, Bayern Munich footballer, all male, I have to say as well, Bryson DeChambeau, golfer, rugby league player, NBA basketballer, about what they've said, typically along an anti-vax line, and then what happened subsequently. So it's interesting for further reading, and I think seeing the case tomorrow will be very revealing as well, I think, of how the constraints on Melbourne in particular are feeding into the way this case is being handled. Because let's face it, Scott Morrison is running into an election quite soon, so he has done a bit of a U-turn. But in Melbourne in particular, I mean, I'm trying to remember, because I deal with colleagues in Australia and New Zealand regularly now. We're doing everything by Zoom, as you probably know. I mean, it's something like 250, maybe 260 days
of a very
lockdown,
long,
not just restrictions.
lockdown.
Yeah, but actually staying at home over the last year and a half. So that's quite significant. So there's going to have to be a balance struck, I think, between the perception of civil liberties and then a claimed exemption on grounds which are less than clear legally, and we'll find out much more.
Well, I think we'll just have to leave that there, because there's so many other things to talk about, and we could actually talk about Novak Djokovic in this, because it's so interesting, and there's so many different layers between his background and the understandable perhaps hesitation people from his neck of the woods as well, who aren't that keen on vaccines for, you know, very strong historical reasons. There's lots of other things we could talk about. We just wouldn't discuss anything else though if we stayed with it, but it's definitely something I think we'll be discussing off the ball again in the coming days, because I think it's going to keep rolling on for a few more days. And Clíona, a story that keeps rolling on, and we were talking about, you know, people looking miserable and locked down at home. My God, there's a photo in the Sunday Times today of the Man United team looking like they wish they were locked down at home. It's a piece by Alison Rudd.
Yeah, and I'm not a big fan. I like Alison Rudd, but I'm not a big fan of this piece at all, and I'm not a big fan of the way that picture has been used. My other half is a professional photographer, and he always says the phrase, a picture tells 1,000 words is the greatest lie, because it can catch a moment that doesn't reflect the reality at all. And anybody who watched the rugby last night even and saw Simon Zebo getting a red card, yes, it was a red card, but if you saw certain aspects of it, it looked really deliberate. But there's another player of his own team coming across him, I think we seem to sort of blind him. There's this notion that a picture tells the truth, and the way that picture was weaponized, to use the word again, against Man U this week, I wasn't a big fan of it. I remember a few years ago, a good while ago, I remember in a famous club game, there was a photo taken again. It showed somebody pulling on somebody, you know, very dangerously. But if you saw it on video, it wasn't quite as dangerous. So photos, you know, can often not capture a truth. And the way that this photo was used, I know obviously they lost to Wolves and everybody hopped on and piled on. And Alison Rudd's piece is, you know, it's a humorous take on it, if you like. And
I have to say, I loved it, Clíona.
Did you? Yeah.
But maybe that's because I wanted to believe what that photo was telling me, because this is what I suppose, who cares what I think, but this is what I've been saying about Man United for months, that manager after manager has been hung, drawn and quartered, whereas really it's these players who ain't shaping up. And I think that picture so maybe that's just me projecting what I want to see in it myself, Clíona, so perhaps your other half is absolutely right.
Yeah, well, I don't know, but look, she particularly hones in on the fact that it's Phil Jones in the air, and you know how he's being energised and sort of his reputation, you know, and how he was seen compared to all the superstars around him. So that's her angle on it. And look, it's cleverly written and it's an opinion piece. And she says that the snap taken tomorrow evening when they walk out against Aston Villa, that it should be a very different picture. It'll be really interesting to see. All the photographers are going to be queuing up for that one.
That's for sure. And just to give listeners who might not have seen this piece just a little bit of context, I'll bring you in, Katie, after I just read this out. From left, Cristiano Ronaldo seems distracted by the near certainty that he would not make the final shortlist for this year's best FIFA men's player. David De Gea appears unable to look the fans in the eye. Nemanja Matic wears the air of one not entirely sure why he's still being picked. Scott McTominay is perhaps remembering being advised by a favourite auntie that if you look serious, then people will take you seriously. Mason Greenwood presumably had no idea that the game at Old Trafford kicked off at 5:30 and had hoped to nap before the usual Monday night start time at 8 p.m. and it goes on and on. What did you make of it, Katie?
I mean, you haven't had time to read all of that. Probably the first two paragraphs, I think, are tongue-in-cheek, to be honest. And I did find them funny, because when you come to it fresh, you read the description of the player, you look to the photograph, then you go back to the next description of the next player. So it's quite a clever use, I think, of engagement between the text and the photograph. And it does draw you in to what she goes on to say a little bit later, which is a little bit more serious. To be honest, Clíona, I mean, I enjoy watching Man U, and I have to say they would have been one of my teams that I would have supported. I can't say that I'm a diehard Man United fan, but I think she is being funny in the first two paragraphs and then trying to draw us into what is, as you rightly say, a saga now that's been trundled out in so many directions. I tend to look to some of the more quote-unquote serious pieces, I think, for insights, Máire, because it strikes me that of the top 6, more or less consistently now in the Premiership, the Glazers are the ones that seem to be more evidently seeking to take something back out of Man United in terms of money invested. I mean, for many years now, even though it's put up there as the echelon of football around the world, most of the top 6 are running in debt simply because they've been bankrolled by billionaires. And the Glazers were one of those, but they're running it more akin to the American model, which is that we need to be able to take something back out in terms of our commercial investment. And that clearly off the field is impacting on the fortunes of Man United, not just today and yesterday, but over a period of time now. Now, obviously Alison Rowe doesn't get into that, but I think that's what interests me more, because that's what's going to determine the outcome of this on the field.
It'll be more that kind of stuff going on at the boardroom. Do you think it's infiltrating down, or do you think the players have any kind of cognizance of it any more than we do?
I don't necessarily think the players are paying undue attention to it, because let's face it, they have a new manager coming in now, and as any player, you know that you're seeking to impress moving forward, not least because of the poor results. But I think the stability of the club as a whole can impact on a player, and undoubtedly till they get that resolved off the field and get it on a better platform, then that's going to determine, number one, whether Rangnick stays on for longer, and 2, what's happening behind the scenes and whether there is an eye on something that's going to be different in about a year's time, because he's been, described as somebody that's literally trying to hold the ship in light of what's happened so far. So the overall stability will impact on the results on the field, undoubtedly, going forward.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, I think Clíona's right there. I think every photographer will be trying to make his week's wages now, watching out for Man United over the coming nights. I just want to move on because there's just so much you want to cover today. And Clíona, I know you pinpointed out Dermot Gilleese's article today, that you enjoyed it and you enjoyed giving it a read. Do you want to give the people at home an idea of what it was about today?
I think that was Katie, actually.
Oh, was it Katie? Sorry, I'm wrong. I'm implicating you, Clíona. I apologise. I read it as well. And the headline is, "What's been seldom won definitely is wonderful. Victory in the States has been the ultimate challenge for Irish golfers." There's a photo of Seamus Power, and there's a photo of Leona Maguire as well in action at the Solheim Cup, Katie.
Yeah, page 21 of the Sunday Independent. And again, I'll say I'm not a keen golfer. I enjoy watching golf. So I was actually drawn to this piece, number one, because we finally see an image of a female sports person.
Imagine that.
And the wonderful job that Dermot does, I think, of not only demonstrating his historical knowledge of the game, but of drawing in a number of threads of how the game has progressed historically, and indeed some of the focus on the Irish interest on players going forward. So it's a piece that captures what's happening today, as well as the ways in which some players in the early 1900s, male and female, were Grand Slam winners in the golfing world, that is, across the board. So I was really interested when he started to shift from the kind of current focus into his 2004 visit. This is Dermot's visit, that is, to the US Open, where he saw the performance of 14-year-old Michelle Wie in the Sony Open. I mean, when I read that, my first question was, and somebody could do a really good piece on this, where is Michelle Wie now? You hear of these such prolific young players, and it actually caused me to go and have a look. And I hadn't realised that Michelle Wie was actually forced to retire because she had chronic wrist injuries. Now, she's now early 30s, she's married, she had a daughter, I think, in 2020. Whether or not that might have been part of her decision potentially to retire from the game as well. But the fact that she was forced to retire owing to chronic wrist injuries, and of late, she's now, I think, seeking to get back into the game. I don't know how permanent this will be. She's currently ranked, I think, in about the top 600 now. I don't think she's qualified that much recently in terms of getting beyond the earlier qualifying rounds. But it took me back to the history of women's golf a little bit more. And indeed, Dermot goes even further then, which was really nice, because he talks about England's Joyce Weatherford winning the first of 4 successive British women's amateur titles in the early 1900s, how she benefited from learning the game as a 17-year-old from her brother. I mean, that theme is so repeated in the stories of young female sports stars who are supported a lot by male relatives initially. I think when you're trying to, and you can imagine in that period of time, trying to secure that level of success in the game. And then he goes on to talk about male players as well who hold the distinction of having those number of milestones or titles, and brings it right up to date through to an interest, as all of us will have, I think, in the potential successes of McIlroy, I should say, this year. It's hard to think he's going to be 33. I mean, we've lived through his sports career, because him, like Michelle Wie, has come through sport at such a young age. So it's a really nice read, even if you're not interested in golf. That's what I would say about it, because it brings the historical element of the game and the current focus out really nicely.
I think, Clíona, that's what got me with this piece, because I enjoy talking about golf. I can't watch a whole weekend of it. I just feel life's too short for it. But I do love watching, the final afternoon, and I love reading about the people involved in it. But to me, there were two things about the opening of it, when he quotes Dr. Bob Rotella. He's a leading sports psychologist, and he says, part one is trying to get to the top and being the best, and then part two is finding a way to stay there. And then the mentioning of Michelle Wie, and it just clicked something in my brain. Oh God, yeah, I remember that name. And then to realise that she's still only in her very early 30s, but it feels like a long time ago. And Rory McIlroy as well, being another, I suppose, child protege. They're so young, and they are living through these elite moments really at a time where we wouldn't put ourselves through that at that age, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, the whole issue of hot housing, young athletes in sport, and how long they stay in sport afterwards, and what happens to them, and like Michelle Wie, do they get injured or whatever? And remember, she had massive pressure on her, because she was brought into play in men. She not brought into play, but obviously went to play in men's tournaments, and got a huge deal of coverage and notoriety from that. She came back and played, actually, I think in the past year, even if I remember correctly. She's been guesting in a few things. Look, Dermot Gillespie is brilliant on golf history. Like, he is just the doyen of golf in Ireland, really, in terms of particularly in his knowledge of history. And I was really interested, actually, in another completely different part of that, which shows how interesting the article is. And that was, he's talking about these brothers from O'Hare's from Greenore, and how they were such trailblazers in America in the 1920s. And I had no idea about them, and it's a really interesting piece about them. And he's talking about Gene Sarrazin and people like that, all of that. That's what he does brilliantly, I think. And whenever you read anything by him, that is always going to, but it's really interesting to point out, for him pointing out, it's a bit like music, isn't it? Like the States is where you have to crack it in golf, and as we've seen with McIlroy, if it doesn't happen there, we seem to just undervalue it hugely.
That's for sure. And if you have to crack the golf in the States, you have to crack the darts in the Ali Pali. And there is a piece, Clíona, I know you picked this one out of Eamon Sweeney and the back page of the Sindo, and the headline is Fanfare for the Common Man, and there's a great photo of Peter Wright there. And the darts were great. That also feels like a year ago, but that was only a few nights ago.
And I think people were really invested in it, and this year, Máire Treasa, because so much else was off, and there was literally no live sport to watch. So many people just watching social media. So many people got really invested in the World Darts Championship and the Ali Pali this year. It's a really nice piece, and he's making the point that unlike an awful lot of elite athletes nowadays, we people identify with darts players because of who they are and where they come from. And he goes on to say Michael Van Gerwen was a tiler, Rob Cross an electrician, Gary Anderson a builder, James Wade worked in a garage, and Smith was going to become a joiner before staking his all on darts. And then he also says, he describes them. He says that they're the people who are up repairing power lines in the middle of a storm, fixing phone cables, who repair boilers, sort out your washing machine. That's why we identify so readily with darts players. But also because there is that issue as well of that thing that they're not media trained and don't seem to have media handlers, and the whole vulnerability, if you like, this year of Michael Smith and how he reacted to defeat, and then how Rice dealt with him afterwards, chivying along and trying to build up his spirits again. He's just saying, like, that's what people really identify with in sport, and I think he's right.
I felt as well, like, I was just thinking when I was reading this, because I read this piece after the Dermot Gilleese piece, and I was thinking the same kind of thing about darts. I wouldn't have an in-depth knowledge of it, but I enjoy watching it when it's on. And Katie, I was kind of thinking, perhaps could golf learn something about this? I mean, darts is it's very similar, you know, with the psychological contest between two players. But like, could golf perhaps learn and maybe just become a bit quicker, or make the rounds a bit slower or shorter? I know people thinking sacrilege now that I've said this, but it was great TV viewing for the common person. You didn't need to know much to enjoy it, I suppose is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, agreed. But I suppose remember that we're talking about two very different sports there with very different class backgrounds, Moira. So absolutely, I mean, the sentence, I think, by Eamon Sweeney, it's towards the end of the article, and Clíona, I'm sure you've noticed this as well. It really, I enjoyed it, and it struck that chord for me about the class differences. And he says, one plumber will always be worth 10,000 social media influencers. And it you know, brings out really nicely that kind of sense of connection, the unfetteredness of the connection, not only between the fans and the players, but as you say, Maura, between the players themselves. And in some ways it's not surprising, because the trajectory of darts has taken a very different trajectory to other sports. It owes its origins to working class pubs and the social clubs of England. Its association with the pub has, some might argue, actually held back its recognition. And the game that we've seen today over the last few days is actually a reflection of the fact that the two biggest organisations, the British Darts Organisation, split essentially from what is now the Professional Darts Corporation, or you might think of it as World Darts in a sense. It waxed and waned its popularity over the course of the 20th century, particularly in England, in and around the 70s and 80s. And that's what essentially led to this split, where you now see these kinds of players pursuing and being able to pursue this kind of career under the Professional Darts Corporation brand, as it were. I mean, I also went from this to some of the other pieces, and I know we won't have time, Maura, to discuss them today, for instance, around cynicism in the GAA and around some of the pieces about the treatment of referees. And I do wonder whether moving forward, if we're all in agreement and we place emphasis on sport and its potential to be able to do more than simply sport itself. In other words, that it's more than just performance. We spoke earlier about connections, about social capital, about social mobility, for instance. I wonder whether we're reaching a time over the next decade where we're actually going to have to think about almost respect marks to be awarded for competition, you know, whether it's club hurling, football, rugby, and all the sports that we cover here, as well as at international level. Because I was particularly concerned by another piece in the referees report, you know, talking about and recording some of the abuse that he received in a club Gaelic Games match. And I think it is about time that we look to that, to be able to reward and offer incentives to sports clubs, communities, essentially the provinces. In rugby are a commercial outfit, but ways of incentivising us to be able to maintain that focus on the fact that there is more than simply performing and winning. And that might well have to be a pilot or a test case at some point going forward. But you are seeing this unfettered love and connection really in darts, precisely because it's probably maintained its connection right back to its working class roots, much more than some of the other sports that we've discussed so far.
But that notion as well, Máire Treasa, of, you know, that your sporting heroes are people that you see in everyday life. They come in through your door, they work in your house, or, you know, you meet them on the street, or they serve you across a counter. It just, there's a really interesting link there with the GAA as well, I think. Though I think that element of senior inter-county GAA perhaps has gone in recent years, simply because it has become such a game so dominated by young men in their 20s, and a lot of them students, you know. But that was always, I feel, why we felt that GAA players, men and women, were so special. And
also media management as well, Clíona. It's hard to access them.
Yes, and also managers managing teams as if they're managing Man United, and making sure that nobody speaks out of turn, and all of that, which I've seen, you know, come from the men's game into the women's game. And I think at a loss to us as supporters as well, because so much of it is sanitized now. So, but it did strike me, there are comparisons, but it does make you think as well. And even Katie's talking about it, Philip Lanigan has pieces, a few pieces there as well about cynicism in the GAA, they're talking about in relation to the club finals at the moment. You know, the GAA is a changed place now as well, you know, but it is interesting how many people were touched by the darts this year, and I think particularly got involved with it because there was so little live sport on elsewhere.
Well, there's plenty more to talk talk about. We do have to take a very short break. Do stay with us. We'll have more of the paper review after a few more minutes.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
They had the 3 bodies on the ground outside and they didn't want me to see the 3 bodies.
I'm Frank Graney, host of News Talk's Inside the Crime, which tells the horrific story of the Christmas morning murders of Sharon, Zara and Nadia Whelan in Windgap, County Kilkenny. In our podcast series, we'll find out what happened to them and we'll hear from the detectives who led the hunt for their killer.
The story he gave was a total lie.
The murderer can be contained within a community.
You can listen to all 5 episodes on newstalk.com/Inside the Crime or on the News Talk app, powered by Go Loud.
Discover the Dunnes Stores app and put better value at your fingertips. Tap to browse all our latest grocery offers. See all your 10 off 50 grocery vouchers stored in one place and scan your Value Club card to earn points. All within the app, saving you time and money. Plus, download the app today and you'll receive a one-time 10 off 30 welcome voucher. Dunnes Stores, always better value. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome voucher can be used on next grocery shop of €30 or more.
January sale now on at Curry's. Save €100 on the Dell Inspiron laptop with Intel i3 processor, now $529. Get the Panasonic 65-inch 4K UHD TV, now $949. Save €500. And save up to €400 on American-style fridge freezers. Plus, we've got free delivery on all large kitchen appliances and large screen TVs. T's and C's apply. Get in-store or online at currys.ie.
Getting together might take a bit more planning this year. Before you do, remember to first think RSVP. Risk, symptoms, venue, people. Risk. What's the risk? Am I vaccinated or have I got my booster? Symptoms. Am I currently showing symptoms of COVID-19? Venue. Are they following the guidelines? Will I be wearing a mask? And people. How many people am I meeting? How many households are coming together? Let's all RSVP ahead so we can stay safe this year. Find out more at gov.ie/risk aware, supported by the Government of Ireland.
Let's make today a good day. Let the shutters up and the stock arrive. Let the team know I couldn't do it without them. Let me give it my all. Let's do ourselves and the business proud. Right, let's get to work.
At AIB, we see Brave and we back it, with specialist teams dedicated to your business needs. Talk to us today about your sector, and let's see what we can do for your business. AIB, we back Brave. Allied Irish Banks plc is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
Fáilte to Off the Ball this afternoon with me, Máire Treasa. We're in the middle and coming near the end now of the Sunday paper review, and I'm delighted to be joined by Clíona Foley and Dr. Katie Liston. We discussed so many subjects, and I love actually mornings like this when the papers cover so much, but unfortunately you find yourself stretched going, oh, this was good and that was good and this was really interesting. But I think we were all taken by an article written by Shane McGrath in the Mail on Sunday, and maybe it's because of the photo of the players smiling at us, the women's national team smiling at us or what, I don't know, but the headline is "Opportunity awaits Clíona. The next 12 months will be hugely challenging for Irish sport, but there will be no shortage of drama and intrigue alongside." And what more does a journalist want than loads of sport but loads of drama and intrigue as well to go along with it?
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose one of the things I'd be disappointed about today, I know we're doing a comment or a Nollaig na Mán special, but you know, it is still surprising when you open papers and see so few images and stories about women. Like 14 women started a new professional season down in Australia this weekend playing Aussie rules, and it is surprising that not one of the papers would do a feature on that, or Sunday papers would look at that in any great detail, where you have time to look at stuff in detail. But yeah, his piece is about just generally covering all of the things that are going to happen in the year ahead. The GA calendar, the shortened GA calendar. Shane is for it, and he's saying, you know, there's a lot of people coming out of woodwork now giving out about it. He likes it. He's talking about the importance of Kevin Potts' appointment in the IRFU and how he will lead the game from now on. And not just in relation to the women's game, clearly, but of the men's game as well. He's looking at the two soccer teams, where they'll go in the next year, the two national senior soccer teams. Talks about athletics. And he mentions the appointment of Una May. And I was really surprised. Dr. Una May has just become the new Sport Ireland. And her appointment, John Tracy was there for 22 years. He was originally 21 and then another one added because the Olympics was moved. But she was appointed, and the Sports Council announced her appointment at 5 o'clock on Friday evening and said she'd be available for interviews at a later date. I just thought it's a really strange time. Like, I just don't know, why would you bury that, 5 o'clock on Friday evening? We know, we work in the media, everything is pre-planned, and why not hold it to next week and do it in a big fanfare? Why was it done then? I just think that's very unusual, and I was a little bit surprised at how she was announced. But she is in a position, governance, we're falling over governance in sports stories, whether it's here or abroad over the last few years. And Sport Ireland, like it or not, is the governance, is the people who oversee the governance of a lot of stuff that has ended up, in political committees in the last few years in this country. So she has a very important role, and I hope to see more of her. But I just thought it was an unusual way to do it. But he mentions it. Yeah,
Katie, it's a great appointment. I think Dr. Una May is a very capable woman and knows her stuff inside out. That's not to say it's not going to be a challenging job for her, because it is a vast appointment with huge responsibility.
Yeah, but it's nice, Máire, to also see somebody who is bringing a research focus through in their own professional career as well. And it's not by any means to denigrate what John Tracy has achieved, but in the 20 years or 20 plus years since the establishment of what was firstly the Irish Sports Council of 1999, and then it became Sport Ireland, we have seen a gradual change in how that governance organisation, and the same here in the north for Sport Northern Ireland, has approached sport. So there's essentially a professionalisation of structures. Now, looking at the way in which Una's immersion in the organisation from the beginning across a range of pathways or practices within the organisation, she certainly has a depth of knowledge from across all of those changes. And moving forward, she clearly has demonstrated amongst a range of very capable candidates that she was the best candidate for that position. It's interesting, Máire, because we now have, north and south of the border, we've got two female leaders of the main governance organisations for sport on the island. Antoinette McKeown, Sport Northern Ireland; Una May, Sport Ireland. We have a female leading the Olympic Federation of Ireland, Sarah Keane. We have a female leading the Federation of Irish Sports, Mary. And I think if there is a time now when we can start to try to connect some of the changes that are happening on the field of play in terms of the growth of girls' and women's participation with changes off the field of play, this decade has to be the decade where by the end of it, and hopefully we're with you, in 2030, Clíona and I, and saying, do you know what, it was a great decade, and we're no longer frustrated at seeing the imbalance in media coverage, at seeing the lack of commitment to bringing women through to senior leadership positions, at the potentially gendered imbalanced focus in policies that are blind to some of the challenges that face female sports people as opposed to male sports people. That, I think, will be the enduring achievement of this particular decade. And it's a very exciting time to see what Una can achieve now, not only from the gendered perspective, but across all of these different elements. I think there's going to be challenges for Sport Ireland, because for the Irish economy, for the economy here in the north, which is very reliant on the subvention from Westminster, there's not going to be the same amount of money that can be committed to elite sport, given the very heavy tax burden there will be from the pandemic. So the extent to which we can continue to invest in these future sports stars, north and south, it's going to be held back a little bit by that. And that will be a challenge for Una, I think, to maintain the commitment of the Irish government to ensuring that they can continue to fund and card the athletes that they wanted. They've already identified clearly for the next Olympic cycle as well.
That's it, Clíona, isn't it? Because it's one challenge doing it from the top down. The other challenge is then from the bottom up. And I think even when we have these very capable women heading up very important organisations, and I know most of them are only there a year or two, and as with Una May, brand new, you still need to bring the grassroots along with you. So you still need to find people at the lower levels, for the want of a better phrase, to be able to push through that kind of policy as well. And that won't be easy, Clíona. You know this yourself. You've covered so many sports from the most elite to the most grassroots. You know how it works.
Yeah, well, I mean, the interesting thing about Rinne May is, I mean, she's a sports scientist by qualification herself, but actually, and she really put the whole of the Irish anti-doping program together, which is seen as an exemplar internationally. But she also, in more recent years, actually, her main work has been in the area of mass participation and in getting grassroots sport together. So that's going to be interesting, I think. Like Shane talks about some of the challenges she has in relation to elite sport. Irish boxing still has issues in terms of governance, and there's an ongoing row there that she's going to have to help to solve. And he also talks about the difficulty for sports like basketball and sports that have been so badly hit by COVID in the last few years, and if it continues, how they're going to help that. But actually, that general thing of general participation is something that she's already really interested in. To be honest, I don't care what gender she is. What I want is people at the top of these sporting organisations to be really capable people, professional people who have a good handle on their remit, and I think that given everything she's done to date, I was very critical of Sport Ireland for a long time in how they handled women in sport, because I felt that they, for a long time, up until 2019, really handed it back to, they gave grants to organisations and said, what are you going to do? Okay, here's money, you go do it. But only then did they put together an actual policy. So only in recent years have they had an actual policy for women in sport. And that is very, very important. And that is now guiding everything else that's happening in other sports as well. And that gives them, I think, the right now to ask sports, what are you doing? Where are your initiatives? And you know, they seem to be much, much more hands-on, and they've employed people to work specifically in the area, like Nora Stapleton. So their whole attitude to women's sport is very different. But as a person in a job at the top of that organisation, the thing to me is that she is a really professional, smart woman and knows the area very well.
Speaking of areas we all know very well, we're coming up to the end of the paper review now, and sure, it wouldn't be a discussion on Off the Ball or any kind of sports programme unless we were talking about the GAA and GAA structures and who's retiring and who's not playing. And I know, Katie, you touched upon it, like when you were speaking about referees and things you'd like to add onto your wish list. We have a wish list as well, Clíona, from Pat Spillane. But before we get into his wish list, I think the other GAA constant in all the papers this weekend, photos of Stephen Cluxton everywhere. Did you ever see a more low fanfare retirement of somebody who changed the absolute face of a game, from participation to kids never wanting to be goalkeepers? Now they're fighting over wanting to be goalkeepers, and he's just walked away from the spotlight without even announcing he's doing it.
Yeah, I laughed when I saw this. People saying the story today was that Cluxton wasn't coming back. I think that is, you were right in your introduction saying that's really not news. The really big news to me today, and as particularly for Dublin football fans, was that Daisy Farrell said yesterday he totally ruled out that McCaffrey or Paul Mannion would come back this year, and he put that on the record. And also that Paul Mannion had to have some knee surgery over the weekend, which may rule him out for the rest of Kilmacud's involvement in the club championships. But look, I was the one that caught my eye today. I was at an O'Byrne Cup game yesterday, and even just watching the kick-out strategies of Westmeath and Kildare, like, it's become a sport in itself now. And all around me, people were talking about the goalkeepers. You know, as you said, a role that nobody ever wanted to play before, but now is seen as so integral. So, you know, there's no doubt Cluxton is such a seminal figure in the history of the GAA now, but one that chose to do all of his talking on the pitch, obviously.
Yeah, Katie, it's rare that somebody, because you'd be aware obviously of how the different structures work and how sport, even the GAA, despite it being an amateur sport, we know a lot of professionalism is in it, but never seen somebody to shy away so much from any kind of attention, but yet become such an enigma, literally just down to because he probably epitomised the best of what you've seen in elite athlete, which is try to make yourself better, but also crucially not harming anyone else while you're doing it and looking after yourself.
And can you imagine, I mean, at the elite level especially, and the competitive structures within Dublin compared to other counties, imagine the level at which he had to maintain consistency in that performance. And even alone, if I think of just probably his potential commitment to strength and conditioning over that period of time, simply to be able to be at the top level when required. I mean, it's nice to see players, I think, who are able to do that without searching the limelight. I see the one observation I'd make potentially about his change on the game, I don't think it was just him as an individual, though obviously he was able to exert that because of the profile of Dublin. But his ability to be able to utilise the goalkeeping position more than what it was previously was a function of how the game itself was changing. And how it was being played differently compared to, and I know we'll come on to Pat Spillane. Is it Pat Spillane? I think, shortly. I mean, how the style of the game, for instance, when Pat Spillane was changing, was very different to how it's being played now, where possession is of the absolute utmost. And in fact, to go back is as important as going forward. And that's why the focus then on the goalkeeping position as potentially the start of that movement, and hopefully the retention of possession for a period of time, became so crucial. Now, all that said, he, of course, had to be able to then excel at those particular skills, and the precision with which he was able to do that, delivering consistently and picking out players, and indeed showing that the goalkeeper could make a contribution simply beyond standing on the goal line and scoring at the other end. That, I think, for me, is what stands out more as well, because the strength and conditioning that he went through meant that he was the go-to player to score from distance. And that's quite a standout feature when you think about the other powerful players that there would have been and are out on the field of play. But yet we now look to something like the dead ball specialist that is the goalkeeper moving forward.
It's funny, I'm just looking at Pat Spillane's piece here, and I love one of the sub-headlines is, I don't make New Year's resolutions, nor do I give up stuff for Lent, but the GAA needs a fresh start. I love that. But he also has like the list here, and playing, he's a few different headings and headlines. He has playing rules and regulations, water breaks, no replays, the blood rule, red card not applying in extra time, split season, the Tailteann Cup, COVID-19 restrictions. There's so much there, Clíona. Where do we start?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I always think of it like everyone, like nowadays people like to paint Pat, who was a brilliant player, as when he's on television as everybody's crazy uncle, and the game's changed now, and he hasn't a clue, and I think if you read his columns, as I do regularly in Sunday World, he actually makes very cogent, logical, and well arguments for things. And this piece is actually really good, and I agree with quite a lot of the things that are in it. I think it's well worth anybody read it just to see what it is he's against, or why he thinks there's a logic. But like he looks at a load of things that are in the J and says, we're changing things, we're changing that, but actually these are the ones that we have never looked at, and why haven't we looked at those? And one of them is the famous red card not applying in extra time. And he gives examples even recently in club games why that seems a crazy one. The no replays one is one I think that has maybe passed people by in terms of this coming season. And he's saying, penalty takings are complete lotteries, and that's going to be an important one as the thing works on. I agree with him on the water breaks. I don't know why they're still there. And he still hates the mark, which a lot of people don't as well. The one I'm amazed that they haven't addressed yet, actually, when they want to change the nature of the game as well, is that you can score with the hand. I still can't understand why that's still there, and I'm amazed that has not been brought up at a special congress at some stage. If you took hand passing, if you took fisted points out of men's football at the moment, I think the game could be very different. So he goes through a load of them, and one of them is a really valid one as well. The Tailteann Cup, which is brought in this year, which is meant to give more prestige, if you like, to a competition for lower graded teams. I've seen this pointed out by other people already. I mean, originally that was the final would be played with the All Ireland. In fact, it's not already. That has been downgraded. It's going to be played with an All Ireland semi-final. So he goes through a load of different things, and he is not for the split season, that's for sure. And he in his argument against it, he says because of the way the new system is, a minority of the country's elite young footballers and hurlers will be expected for their club, their counties and their colleges this month. And he says, worse still, there are a total of 190 games scheduled for the months of February and March, which is the worst month traditionally in Ireland weather-wise, where there's going to be 99 men's matches, championship matches in the months of May, June and July. And then the rest of the year, like we're going to have the men's season will be finished before the August bank holiday. So look, it's well worth reading, and it's a classic. Like he holds strong opinions, but some of them actually, I think sometimes he argues very well for.
It's funny how when I was reading through them, it just goes to show how easily I could be swayed as a person, I suppose. I'd read them, I go, oh yeah, and then I go and read somebody else's opinion and go, oh jeepers, yeah, that makes sense. Katie, you'd have a good kind of, I suppose, outline on the effect of a season, the length of a season, the split season. What do you make of it? Is Pat Spillane right? Should it be gotten rid of, or should it be here, and should it be here to stay?
I think the wider question and the purpose of proposals like this, Máire, and there's different ramifications of it in different sports, to be honest, it's ultimately how can you sustain and support players at that level? And that, for me, has got to be the guiding principle here, because there are genuinely real concerns about burnout across so many sports now, particularly at pinch points where you think about a transition, for instance, from being an 18 or 19-year-old. In this example, Pat Spillane was talking about men, but in women's sports, that transition can take place a little bit younger. And I remember myself, being a very tall, strong 16-year-old, and even sometimes younger now today, being selected to play at senior level. So those pinch points around burnout and enabling players to play across a full year and indeed season after season, that's what's driving this. The principle of a split season makes sense for that reason. But you've got other factors that are impinging on this, because the GAA is trying to manage more than one sport in the calendar. It's trying to maintain the fan base. You've got a commercial impetus coming in now from coverage. So you have a state broadcaster or broadcasters versus, commercial interests. And all of that is not easily to resolve. It's going to take a very coordinated effort to make sure that the players' interests drive all of this. And looking at it from a distance, I would have to say that I don't think the players' interests are first and foremost in all of this. And that's probably not surprising when you think about the extent now to which the GPA is starting to lobby very explicitly for that reason.
I think as well, Máire Treasa, the notion of giving time to clubs has obviously been a factor in this decision as well. And I don't think any of us will probably know where we come down on which side of this argument until we've had a full season of it. But it actually reflects also, there's some really interesting pieces in the paper today about the Africa Cup of Nations, and it's what Katie's talking about, the pinch point for resources and when do you time competitions. There's a lot of pieces in the paper today about the African Cup of Nations and about how it has to be when it is and how clubs have to suffer. And I think if people are interested in that, you'll get lots in the paper about that today. But I really don't think we're going to know until the season is finished how does it all work out, and particularly if it's hit by weather or hit further by COVID, that will affect it.
It's interesting as well, Clíona, because it strikes me it's a bit similar. We remember the arguments people being made, county football and hurling is the showpiece and that's what everybody wants to tune in and see and pay money to go and watch. And it turns out once we showed more club championship games on TG4, excuse me, and then also on other channels like RTE and Air Sport and all them, people watch them as well. There's a bit of a parallel there with ladies football and women's sport. People, nobody wants to watch that. And it turns out once they were actually broadcast, people did watch them.
Yeah, and I was writing a piece about this for the Examiner before Christmas, and talking to Sue Anstis, who had a very interesting book this year on women's sport. I always felt that the way we have to get bums on seats to grow women's sport, because that's how you get money into the game, right? But actually, the growth of women's Super League football in England in the past during COVID and the viewing figures have actually persuaded sponsors to come on board. So it actually may not technically be bums on seats. It may be eyes on screens that now drives it. You still have to grow your audience, but it may be about growing an audience a different way. And I think TG4's coverage of club games and their coverage of other sports this year, whether it was AFLW or Irish basketball, has very interesting implications. You have to get the fans there sometimes, but it may not be through actual bums on seats. And COVID, in a way, has actually arguably helped some sports and some women's team sports as well, but also some minority sports in a way that wasn't actually expected.
Katie, we're running out of time here. I know you had a few other articles on your list that if you had your way, we'd be talking about them as well. We'd be here till 7 o'clock tonight and we'd be thrown off air. Are there any other recommendations you want to give our listeners to be hunting out for this afternoon if they're looking for something to read?
I think that just that interplay between the focus on cynicism in the GAA, which is a nice article, and then some of the concerns that I raised about the treatment of referees. They're an important theme, I think, to bear in mind going forward for the future of sport, whether it's eyes on screen or bums on seats, because I think referees are increasingly being seen as the paragon or almost, the female and male resistance to what players are seeking to achieve on the field of play. But I think we need to take a step back and try to learn from sports that have got that balance right as to why that is happening and how we can incentivize. So those couple of pieces I think are interesting. Probably the overall reflection, Máire, from today, I was disappointed, like Clíona, that I didn't see more focus on women's sports. So I think looking forward over the next year, I'm really looking forward to seeing how Eileen Gleeson's going to get on at Glasgow City. We worked with Glasgow City more than 10 years ago now when they were a club on the rise. They came here to Belfast to play in the Women's Champions League qualifying tournament. And you could see even then the extent to which their investment in the structures off the field of play were going to bear fruition. And they're doing that. And not surprisingly, Eileen's already made some important signings. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to the Women's Euros as well, even though the Republic aren't in, Northern Ireland are. And that will be interesting to see in terms of the development of women's soccer on the island, as to what level the team can be competitive, because it will be a benchmark. And I know the Republic were disappointed considering they lost to Ukraine, and yet Northern Ireland were able to go on and beat Ukraine. Probably of interest as well, just one last one. It's not covered in the ROI papers, but it will come up into the future. We now have the first professional women's soccer player on the island at club level here in the north. And the playing population is smaller here. It's not particularly bigger in the south, but that there are differences. And I think that's going to be important in terms of how both international teams will be into the future, because the gap has been at the national league level. And there's been a call for a long time for investment in women's club soccer. So it's starting to happen here in the north. And let's see what happens for the FAI if they're able to get that on the right footing as well.
I think it's just great that you've just been able to list out some really tangible things for us to look forward to, and we're not just sitting here talking about, I wish this happened, I wish that happened. We wish lots would happen, ladies, but thankfully it does appear that they are happening. And thanks so much that you guys made this paper review happen over the last hour and a half or so and gave us your time in Seo Ed Nollaig Naman. Dr. Katie Liston, agus Clíona Foley, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for joining us for the paper review. Now we need to go and take a quick break, and we'll be back very shortly.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
The Holland & Barrett 1 cent sale is back, with buy one get one for just 1 cent on vitamin